The phone felt cold in my hand, even after my son had hung up. It was a specific kind of cold. The kind that seeps into the bone, not from the weather, but from a space that has suddenly opened up inside you. "We're too busy for you this Christmas." Mom David's voice had been casual, rushed. The sound of a man trying to get a chore out of the way, like taking out the trash or signing for a package he didn't want. In the background I heard Susan, his wife. Her voice was a stage whisper, sharp and impatient. "Just tell her, David. Rip the Band-Aid off a Band-Aid." As if 37 years of Christmas mornings were a minor scrape. As if the smell of my sweet potato pie, the one his father always said was the only real taste of the holidays, was just a sticky adhesive to be pulled away and discarded. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just listened to the dead air on the line, the faint hum of his life continuing on without me. "All right, son," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. He'd rushed on then, filling the silence with excuses. The kids had so many activities. Susan's parents were flying in. The house was already going to be bursting at the seams. It was all about logistics, you see. Not about love. Not about want. Just logistics. I hung up the phone and placed it back in its cradle. Gently. I have always been a gentle woman. My husband, Robert, used to say my hands could soothe a crying baby or mend a broken bird's wing with the same quiet grace. My hands did not tremble. Not yet. I looked around my living room. The grandfather clock Robert and I had bought on our 25th anniversary stood silent in the corner. I'd let it wind down a few years ago. The constant ticking had started to feel like a countdown. On the mantelpiece, photos of my grandchildren were tucked into silver frames. The school pictures they sent every year, with forced smiles and identical blue backdrops. I had a photo from Imani's high school graduation. She was the only one who looked genuinely happy. Her eyes held a light that the others lacked. My son, David, and his wife, Susan, were in a large frame in the center. Their wedding picture. They looked impossibly young and full of a kind of certainty that life had long since eroded. Or perhaps it hadn't eroded it. Perhaps it had just revealed what was underneath all along. The air in the house was thick with the smell of cinnamon and baked apples. I had been making a practice pie, getting the crust just right, the way David liked it. Flaky with a little bit of butter and sugar sprinkled on top before it went into the oven. I walked into the kitchen. The pie was cooling on the counter, a perfect golden brown. It was a beautiful pie. Pie made with love. A pie made for people who were too busy. I took a knife from the drawer. The handle was smooth wood, worn down from decades of use. I cut a single perfect slice. I put it on one of my good china plates, the ones with the little blue flowers that I only ever use for special occasions. I sat down at my small kitchen table. The chair creaked softly, a familiar, comforting sound. This, I thought, is a special occasion. The pie was delicious. The apples were tart and sweet, the cinnamon was warm, and the crust was exactly as it should be. Flaky. Perfect. I ate the entire slice slowly. I savored every bite. It was a meal for one. And in the silence of my kitchen, a thought began to form. It wasn't an angry thought. It was not born of spite or a desire for revenge. It was a thought as clear and clean as a pane of glass after a hard rain. The thought was this: I am done. I was not done being a mother. I was not done being a grandmother. I was done being an option. I was done being a convenience. I was done being a box to be checked off on a list of holiday obligations. I looked at the phone on the wall. I thought of David's voice. I thought of Susan's whisper. I thought of all the other whispers, the other casual dismissals, the forgotten birthdays, the calls that only came when they needed something. A recipe. A babysitter. A loan that was never really a loan. I remembered the Christmas 5 years ago. I had spent 2 days making collard greens, macaroni and cheese, cornbread from my mother's recipe. I'd packed it all up in my best serving dishes. When I arrived, Susan had looked at the bags in my hands with a tight smile. "Oh, Eleanor. You shouldn't have. The kids just don't eat that kind of traditional food." We ordered a spiral ham. My food had sat on the counter, untouched. I had packed it all back up at the end of the night and taken it home. I ate it for a week alone at my kitchen table. Each bite was a reminder. I remembered David's 40th birthday. I had bought him a beautiful, expensive watch, the kind his father had always wanted but could never afford. I'd had it engraved on the back. To my son with all my love. When he opened it, he'd smiled briefly. Thanks, Mom. It's nice. He put it back in the box. Later that evening, I saw Susan wearing a new diamond bracelet. David knows what I like, she'd said, holding her wrist out for her friends to admire. I had seen the watch a few months later in a pawn shop window downtown. I didn't go in. I just stood on the sidewalk and looked at it, glinting under the fluorescent lights. I had not mentioned it. I just absorbed the hurt, filed it away with the others. A whole filing cabinet of hurts, neatly organized by date and occasion. That phone call wasn't a Band-Aid being ripped off. It was just the final file being placed in a cabinet that was already overflowing. It was the one that made the drawer refuse to close. I finished my pie. I washed the plate and the fork, dried them and put them away. I went into my bedroom. In the bottom drawer of my dresser, beneath stacks of old, soft linens that smelled of lavender, was a metal box. I took it out and placed it on my bed. The key was on a chain around my neck, tucked beneath my dress. I had worn it every day since Robert passed. Inside the box were all of our important papers. The deed to the house, our marriage certificate, Robert's death certificate, my birth certificate, and my last will and testament. I had a lawyer draw it up 10 years ago, right after Robert died. It was simple. The house, my savings, my modest investments, everything was to be split evenly between my 2 grandchildren, Jacob and Emily, to be held in trust until they were 25. David was the executor. At the time it had felt right. It had felt just. I took the document out. The paper was crisp. I read my own name, Eleanor Vance. I read David's name. I read the names of his children. I ran my finger over the lawyer's letterhead. Thompson and Associates. Mr. Thompson had been a kind man, patient. He had explained everything clearly. He must be an old man now, if he was even still practicing. I picked up the phone book from my nightstand. The pages were thin and dusty. I looked up the name. Thompson and Associates was still there. But the address was different. They had moved to a newer building across town. I found a pen and a small notepad. I wrote down the number and the address. My handwriting was steady. The penmanship of a woman who had written 1,000 grocery lists, 1,000 birthday cards, 1,000 checks to pay the bills on time. The penmanship of a woman who knew what she was doing. The next morning was Christmas Eve. The sun was pale and weak, casting long thin shadows across the frost-covered lawn. My neighbors had bright, blinking lights on their houses. Inflatable snowmen and reindeer. My own house was dark. I hadn't put up a tree. I hadn't hung a wreath. What was the point? I made myself a pot of chicory coffee, strong and black. I drank it while I got dressed. I chose my Sunday best. A simple wool dress, my good coat, the string of pearls Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a woman on her way to church. I looked like a woman on her way to a funeral. In a way I was both. I called the law office. A young woman's voice answered, bright and cheerful. Thompson and Associates, happy holidays. I would like to make an appointment, I said. With Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson Sr. is retired, ma'am. His son Michael has taken over the practice, of course. Time moves on. Is it possible to see Michael Thompson today? I asked. There was a pause. It's Christmas Eve, ma'am. We're closing at noon. I understand, I said. It is a matter of some urgency. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead. I simply stated a fact. There was another pause. I could hear her typing. He has a cancellation at 11 o'clock. Can you make it then? Yes, I said. I can. I drove myself to the new office building. It was all glass and steel. Nothing like the old brick building I remembered. I found a parking spot and sat in the car for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were clear. There were no tears. There was only a quiet, unshakable resolve. The lawyer's office was on the 7th floor. The waiting room was decorated for Christmas, but it felt sterile. A perfect, joyless tree stood in the corner. The air smelled of clean carpets and expensive coffee. Michael Thompson was younger than I expected, with kind eyes like his father but a more modern suit. He shook my hand firmly. Mistress Vance. It's a pleasure. My father spoke of you and your husband often. He was a good man, I said. Please have a seat, he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his large desk. My receptionist said it was urgent. I sat down. I opened my handbag and took out the will. I placed it on his desk. I want to change this, I said. Today he looked at the document, then back at me. His expression was professional, unreadable. He did not ask why. He did not seem surprised. He simply picked it up and began to read. This is a fairly standard will, Mistress Vance, he said after a few moments. Everything held in trust for the grandchildren. Your son as executor. Yes, I said. That is what I want to change, he leaned forward slightly. In what way? I want my son David Vance removed. As executor and as a beneficiary of any kind. I want his wife Susan Vance and their children Jacob and Emily Vance removed as well. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. He still did not ask why. He just made a note on a legal pad. So you wish to disinherit your son and his family entirely? That is correct, I said. The words felt solid in my mouth. They were not words of anger. They were words of fact. They were the truth. And who? He asked, his pen poised over the paper. Do you wish to name as your new beneficiary? This was the part one had thought about all night sitting in my quiet house. Who had earned the legacy Robert and I had built? Who deserved the security and the comfort that came with this house, with these savings? The answer was simple. My granddaughter, I said. Imani Carter. Imani was my daughter's child. My daughter, Sarah, had passed away 15 years ago. Cancer took her far too young. Her husband had remarried and moved away, and Imani had been raised by them. But she never forgot me. She was the one who called not just on holidays, but on a random Tuesday afternoon to see how I was doing. She was the one who sent me pictures of her college campus, who told me about her classes, her dreams of becoming a doctor. She was the one who, when she came to visit, sat with me for hours asking about my life, about her grandfather, about the stories behind the photographs on the mantel. She was the one who saw me. Imani Carter, Mr. Thompson repeated, writing it down. And the executor? I would like you to be the executor, Mr. Thompson. Your firm. I will, of course, ensure you are compensated for your services. We can certainly arrange that, he said. He looked at me, a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps compassion in his eyes. Mistress Vance, are you sure about this? It is a significant change. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. He nodded slowly. Very well. It's short notice, but we can draft a codicil today. It will serve as a legal amendment to the existing will. We can draft a completely new one in the new year. But the codicil will be legally binding immediately. We'll need 2 witnesses. His receptionist and a young paralegal were called in. They stood awkwardly as Mr. Thompson explained the document. I signed my name on the line he indicated. My hand did not shake. The 2 young women signed as witnesses. Their signatures were loops and swirls, the handwriting of a different generation. It was done. I paid for his services with a check from my purse. As I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. Mistress Vance, he said, his voice low. My father always said your husband was one of a kind. A man of integrity. He was, I said. He also said, Michael Thompson continued, meeting my eyes, that you were the stronger of the 2. Merry Christmas. And to you, Mr. Thompson, I said. Walking out of that building, the winter air felt different. It was still cold, but it was a clean cold. A cleansing cold. It felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for a very long time. My next stop was the bank. The lobby was busy with people making last-minute withdrawals for the holiday. I stood in line and waited patiently. When it was my turn, I went to a young teller with a cheerful smile. I need to speak with the bank manager, I said. I was shown to a small office. The manager was a woman about my daughter's age, with a professional but kind demeanor. I explained what I needed. I have a joint savings account with my son David Vance, I said. I would like to have his name removed. She pulled up the account on her computer. This is an Eleanor account, Mistress Vance. You have every right to do that. He won't need to be present. Good, I said. I also have him listed as the power of attorney on all my accounts, in case of emergency. I want that revoked. Immediately, this gave her a moment's pause. She looked at me, her expression softening. Of course. We will just need you to sign a few forms. She printed the documents. I signed them. Again, my signature was firm. Clear. I then asked her to help me transfer the majority of the funds from that savings account into a new one. In my name only. I left a few $100s in the old account. Pittance. An afterthought. My final request was for a new debit card and a box of new checks, with my name, Eleanor Vance, printed on them, and my name alone. I left the bank feeling lighter. Each step I took was a step away from a life of being taken for granted. Each form I signed, each decision I made was a brick being laid in the foundation of a new life. A life that belonged only to me. When I got home, the house was quiet. The practice pie was still on the counter. I cut another slice, but I didn't eat it. I wrapped it carefully and put it in the freezer. Maybe Imani would like it when she came to visit next. I spent the rest of Christmas Eve performing small, symbolic acts of separation. I went into the guest room, the room that was always reserved for David and Susan. I stripped the bed of the sheets I always kept fresh for them. I packed them away in a box. I took the guest towels, the ones they used, and put them in the donation pile for the church. I went through the house and gathered up every photograph of David, Susan, and their children. I did not break the frames or tear the pictures. I was not a woman given to melodrama. I simply laid them face down in a shoebox. I put the shoebox on the top shelf of a closet I rarely opened. Out of sight. I went into what had been David's childhood bedroom. For years I had kept it as a sort of shrine. His old baseball trophies on the shelf. His high school yearbooks. I began to pack it all into boxes. Trophies. Books. Old report cards. I was not erasing him. I was simply reclaiming the space. This room would be my sewing room. Place for my own things. My own hobbies. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. I dreamed of my mother, humming a gospel hymn in her kitchen. I dreamed of Robert, holding my hand as we walked along the beach. I dreamed of a future that was a blank page, waiting for me to write on it. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my phone did not ring at 8 o'clock in the morning with a perfunctory Merry Christmas, Mom, from my son. The silence was a gift. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, a cup of good tea. I ate it while reading the newspaper. I listened to a gospel program on the radio. The music filled my quiet house, a chorus of praise and resilience. Felt like prayer. Around noon my phone buzzed. It was a text message from David. Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you have a good day. It was the kind of message one sends to a distant cousin or a former colleague. Devoid of warmth. Devoid of love. An obligation fulfilled. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. I did not reply. An hour later, another text. This time from Susan. Eleanor. The boys were asking about their Christmas check from you. Did you mail it? So that was it. Not concern. Not love. A financial transaction. I had for 30 years sent a generous check to my son's family every Christmas. It was for the grandchildren, I always told myself. For their education. For their future. But I knew it was often used for other things. A new patio set. A weekend trip to a resort. This year there was no check. There would be no more checks. I deleted her message too. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I blocked both of their numbers. The phone asked me to confirm. Are you sure you want to block this number? I pressed confirm without hesitation. The rest of the day was peaceful. I read a book. I started sorting through my old sewing patterns. I made a plan for my new sewing room. I would put my grandmother's old rocking chair in the corner by the window. I would fill the shelves with colorful fabrics and threads. The next day, the voicemails began to appear. Because I had blocked their numbers, the calls went straight to voicemail without my phone ringing. A small, red dot on the phone icon was the only sign of their attempts to reach me. Out of a sense of detached curiosity, I listened to them. The first one was from David. His voice was laced with annoyance. Mom, are you getting our texts? Susan said you haven't replied. Call me back. The second one, a few hours later, was more agitated. Mom, seriously. What is going on? We're starting to get worried. Just pick up the phone, worried. That was a word they used often. But it did not mean what I thought it meant. It did not mean they were worried about my health or my happiness. It meant they were worried that their routine had been disrupted. They were worried that a resource they had come to depend on was no longer available. The third voicemail was from Susan. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the false concern barely masking the steel beneath. Eleanor, honey, this isn't funny. If you're trying to punish us for being busy on Christmas, it's very childish. We're all very hurt. Please just call your son, punish them. Childish. Hurt. Their words told me everything I needed to know. They saw my silence not as a consequence of their actions, but as a manipulation. They could not conceive of a world in which my life did not revolve around them. They could not imagine that my silence was not about them at all. It was about me. I deleted all the voicemails. One by one. The act of pressing that little trash can icon was deeply satisfying. It was a clearing out. A sweeping away of dust and debris. A few days later, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out. For a moment my heart caught in my throat. But then I saw her face and I smiled. It was Imani. She was carrying a small container. She looked nervous. I opened the door before she could knock. "Grandma," she said, her eyes wide. "Are you okay? I've been calling. Dad said you weren't answering anyone's calls." Imani's father, my son-in-law, had always been a decent man. He and David were not close. "I'm fine, baby," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. It was relief. It was joy. Come in, she stepped inside, looking around the living room. "It looks different," she said. "I'm making some changes," I said. She held out the container. "I brought you some soup." I was worried there it was again. That word. But in her mouth it sounded different. It sounded real. I took the soup. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to," she said. She looked me in the eyes, and her own were filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "Grandma, what happened?" "Uncle David called my dad, ranting and raving. Something about you being mad about Christmas." I invited her into the kitchen. I heated up the soup she brought. It was lentil, my favorite. She remembered. Of course she did. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten my slice of pie and made my decision. I told her everything. I told her about the phone call. I told her about Susan's whisper. I told her about the lawyer in the bank. I told her about the voicemails. I did not cry. I simply stated the facts, laid them out on the table between us like pieces of a puzzle. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long time. She just looked at me. Then a single tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm so sorry they treated you like that." For so long she reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm and strong. "I'm not surprised. I've seen it. I've heard them. The way they talk about you when they think no one is listening." And there it was. Validation. The simple, profound gift of being seen. Of being believed. "They think you're a burden," she said, her voice trembling with anger on my behalf. "They don't see you. They don't see all the things you do, all the things you've always done. They just see an ATM and a free babysitter and someone to make a pie they're too good to eat." We sat in silence for a while longer. Then Imani smiled, a real bright smile. "So, a sewing room, huh? I think that's a fantastic idea. I'll help you paint it," and she did. The next weekend she came over with paint cans and rollers. We painted the walls a soft, sunny yellow. We moved my grandmother's rocking chair into the corner. We talked for hours. She told me about her dream of joining Doctors Without Borders. I told her stories about her mother. Stories she had never heard. In that sunny yellow room, I felt a part of myself coming back to life. The part that had been dormant for so long, waiting for permission to exist. In the weeks that followed, I continued my quiet revolution. I contacted a real estate agent, a woman from my church. "I'm thinking of selling the house," I told her. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her face full of concern. "Are you sure? This house holds so many memories." "Memories are in my heart, Martha," I said. "Not in the plaster. The house is too big for me now. It's time for something smaller. Something just for me." I started packing. It was a monumental task. 50 years of a life, of a marriage, of a family, all contained within these four walls. But it was not sad. It was a curation. I was choosing which memories to keep, which objects to carry forward into my new life. I packed the quilts my mother had made. I packed Robert's collection of old jazz records. Packed my books. I packed the china with the little blue flowers. The things that belonged to David, the boxes from his room I labeled clearly, David Vance. I stacked them neatly in the garage. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, the doorbell rang. I knew somehow who it would be. I opened the door. David was standing on my porch. He looked tired and angry. Susan was in the car watching. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." "Hello, David," I said calmly. I did not invite him in. I stood in the doorway, a human threshold he was not welcome to cross. "Why have you been ignoring us? Why did you block our numbers? What is this all about?" he demanded. His voice was rising. He was a man used to getting his way, and he was baffled by this sudden silent resistance. "I have not been ignoring you, David," I said. My voice was even. Quiet. "I have been listening. For the first time I have been truly listening to what you have been telling me for years." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you on the phone before Christmas," I said. "I heard you say you were too busy for me. I heard Susan tell you to rip the Band-Aid off, and I understood. The Band-Aid has been ripped off. I am simply respecting your wishes. I am making sure I am no longer a burden to you." His face went from anger to a sort of blotchy confusion. He sputtered. "That's not. You're taking that out of context. We were just stressed." "There is no context for cruelty, David," I said. "There is no excuse for disrespect. You are my son. I am your mother. That should mean something. For a very long time I have allowed you to make me believe that it doesn't. I will not allow that anymore." He looked past me into the house. He could see the boxes stacked in the hallway. "What's going on? Are you moving?" The panic in his voice was unmistakable. The panic of a man realizing his safety net was being removed. "I am selling the house," I said. "I am starting a new chapter." "Selling the house?" he almost shouted. "You can't sell the house. That's my inheritance. That's for my kids." And there it was. The truth, ugly and raw. It was never about me. It was about what I had. What I could give him. I looked at him, my son, a man in his 40s acting like a spoiled child. And I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a profound and weary pity. "This house is not your inheritance, David," I said. "It was never yours. It was the home Robert and I built. It is my property. And I can do with it as I please." "You're being vindictive," he accused, his voice shaking with rage. "You're trying to punish us." "No," I said, and my voice was as gentle as it had ever been. "This is not a punishment. This is a consequence. There is a difference. I suggest you learn it." I began to close the door. "You can't do this," he yelled, putting his hand on the door to stop me. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at his face. "Take your hand off my door, David," I said. My voice was low, and it held a power he had never heard before. The power of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore everything to gain. He hesitated, then slowly he removed his hand. I closed the door. I did not slam it. I closed it gently and I turned the deadbolt. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a final irrevocable boundary being set. The house sold quickly. I found a small, bright apartment in a building with a community of other seniors. It had a balcony where I could grow gardenias. It was close to the church and close to Amani's college. I took only the things that brought me joy. My books, my music, my sewing machine. My grandmother's rocking chair. The china with the blue flowers. The photograph of Robert. The one of Amani, her eyes full of light. The rest of my assets, the proceeds from the house, my savings. I worked with Michael Thompson to set up a new plan. A large portion went into a trust for Imani's medical school education. Another portion I donated to my church to help them build the new community wing they had been dreaming of. And a third portion I gave to a local shelter for women and children fleeing domestic abuse. I was building a new legacy. One based not on blood but on need, on kindness, on community. I sent David one final registered letter. I told him he could come and collect the boxes I had packed for him from the garage of the old house before the new owners took possession. I received a certified letter back from his lawyer, threatening to contest the will, claiming I was not of sound mind. Michael Thompson assured me they did not have a case. My mind, he told me, was sounder than most. They never came for the boxes. The new owners disposed of them. My new life is quiet. It is simple. It is my own. I wake up when I want to. I drink my tea on my balcony and watch the sunrise. I volunteer at the church library twice a week. I have joined a quilting circle. The women there are full of stories and laughter. They do not see me as a resource. They see me as a friend. Imani visits every Sunday. We have dinner together. Sometimes I make sweet potato pie. She always eats 2 slices. She tells me about her life and she listens to me talk about mine. She holds my hand. She sees me. Last week a letter arrived. It was from David. His handwriting was shaky, the penmanship of a man who has lost his footing. I opened it. It was 5 pages long. 5 pages of excuses, of justifications, of blame. He was sorry, he wrote, but it was Susan's fault. He was sorry, but he was under a lot of stress. He was sorry, but I had overreacted. Tucked into the last page was a single sentence that was almost the truth. I miss you, Mom. I read the letter. I folded it back up and put it in a drawer. I have not replied. Perhaps one day I will. But it will be on my terms. In my own time. The door to my life is no longer wide open, for anyone to wander in and out of as they please. It is closed. It is locked. I am the only one with the key. I can choose to open it if I wish. I can choose to crack it open just a little to see if the person on the other side has truly changed. To see if they have learned the difference between a person and a possession. But for now, I am content in the quiet of my own home. I am at peace in the stillness. I spent so many years of my life as a foundation for others, a sturdy, reliable presence they built their lives upon without ever looking down to see what was holding them up. Now I am my own house. The foundation is strong. The walls are sound. And the woman who lives inside is for the first time truly, completely, and unapologetically home.